If you're losing your hair, one of the most obvious solutions is a hair transplant. But there's another option that a lot of people overlook: hair loss medication, finasteride, minoxidil and microneedling. These treatments can sometimes maintain your existing hair and even give you significant natural regrowth without surgery. But here's the question: what happens if you stay on these treatments for years? Do the results keep getting better, or do they eventually stop working? Today we're going to find out. I've actually experienced this myself. I was on finasteride for about 4 years, and initially I got some of my best results from the treatment. But after a few years, the treatment started to lose its effectiveness. So I started wondering, is that what normally happens? Because when I started looking at other people's long-term results, I found something much more interesting. Some people actually managed to maintain or even continue improving their hair for many years. So today we are going to look at their journeys, starting with the shortest term results and working our way all the way up to 10 years of treatment. Okay, this is the first one. 1 year of progress on the big 6. And let's look at what this guy was doing. He's 38 and he's been balding since he was 17. He had actually been shaving his head for more than 10 years and then decided he wanted to try to regrow his hair. And look at the starting point. Yeah, he was very bald. He's basically starting from a Norwood 6, which is a bit too late, but then look at the result. Okay, that's actually pretty impressive. But now let's see what he was taking. Oh, I'm going to warn you, this is not exactly the simplest routine in this video. Dutasteride, oral minoxidil, 1.5mm derma roller, so far so good. Ketoconazole shampoo, RU58841, and stemoxidine. What is that? These last two are experimental treatments. I would never recommend you using them unless you like to be treated like a lab mouse. And actually there's something really important about this post. This isn't evidence that every single one of these treatments was responsible for the regrowth. He's using so many things simultaneously that you simply can't know how much each individual treatment contributed. But there is one part of this routine that I find particularly interesting: microneedling. He was using a 1.5mm derma roller and applying topical minoxidil afterwards. And this is something I think gets overlooked. If you're using a growth stimulant like minoxidil, microneedling can be a very interesting addition because you are not just relying on the medication. You are also creating a controlled stimulus in the scalp that may help activate wound healing and growth pathways. And clinical studies have found that combining microneedling with topical minoxidil can produce better hair growth outcomes than minoxidil alone. But there's also a warning here. Look at how frequently he is microneedling: 1.5mm every 4 days. Someone in the comments actually questioned whether that was too frequent, and another commenter suggested waiting at least 2 weeks between 1.5mm sessions to allow the scalp to properly recover. More isn't automatically better. Microneedling is one of those treatments where the goal isn't to destroy your scalp, it's to give it a controlled stimulus and then let it recover. Okay, so that's what an extremely aggressive 1 year routine can look like. But what happens when someone sticks with a treatment routine for several years? Let's jump forward to look at the 3-year result. This one is called 2021 versus 2024. Consistency is key. And I actually like the title because he's right. You will see the best results if you use the treatments year after year, consistently. The guy says he's using 1 mg of finasteride, RU58841 again, and liquid minoxidil. And he basically says that some days he feels like he's made no progress until he found his old pictures. Then he compared 2021 with 2024, and that's when he realized, wow, there's actually a pretty significant difference. Yeah, a really good example of why taking photos matters. Because if you look at your hair every morning, you don't notice the tiny changes, but compare 3 years apart and suddenly it's obvious. And there's another really interesting thing about this post. Someone asked him whether the gains were still coming after the first 1 or 2 years. And he basically said, it's difficult to tell. The changes happened so slowly that he never really felt like he was gaining anything. But when he looked back, he could clearly see that he had gained a significant amount. He also started adding RU58841 to his minoxidil about a year into the process. And he says he started and stopped RU several times, so he even couldn't confidently say which treatment was responsible for which gains. As I said, don't use RU58841. It's a sketchy experimental treatment with not much evidence. His results probably came from minoxidil and finasteride alone. Don't waste your money on that. Okay, next case. This one is called 3-year update to Finasteride Minoxidil Nice Roll 1.5mm Derma Roller. And this guy is 40. His routine is 0.5 milligrams to Finasteride every day, 5% minoxidil foam twice a day, a 1.5mm Derma Roller twice a month, and a daily multivitamin with biotin. And look at the pictures. That's quite a lot of thinning and then a pretty substantial improvement. And what's really interesting, he says that over the last 6 months, he's mostly maintained the same amount of hair. He doesn't expect much more regrowth. And at 40, he's happy with the result. Of course he is. The result is insane. Well done. Especially at 40, where it becomes more difficult to regrow your lost hair. And look at his routine. He's combining DHT suppression with a growth stimulant with microneedling. That's a very different philosophy from relying on one treatment alone. And he's not microneedling every few days. He's using a 1.5mm Derma Roller twice a month. Again, this isn't a recommendation to copy someone else's exact routine, but it does reinforce something we saw earlier. Microneedling needs recovery time. More damage isn't automatically more stimulation. The objective is controlled stimulation. I would recommend therefore using a microneedling device only once a week. That's enough. Now let's go even further, because this next guy has been treating his hair loss for 4 years. And this one is particularly interesting for me because his experience actually overlaps with mine. Okay, 4 years oral finasteride, 2 years oral minoxidil, age 23 to 27. Let's see. Okay, pretty significant thinning. Wow, that's actually a really strong result. And let's see what he says about the treatment. He's been taking 1 milligram of finasteride every day, and he says he hasn't changed that dose. He added oral minoxidil later, and when somebody asked him how much of the regrowth came from finasteride, his answer was interesting. He estimated about 75% of his regrowth came from finasteride, although obviously that's his personal estimate, so not something we can objectively measure. And that's important because you can't look at the before and after photo and scientifically assign 75% of the result to one treatment. But what we can say is that he personally felt the most of his improvement happened before he added oral minoxidil. And this is where I want to talk about something I mentioned at the beginning. For me, finasteride worked extremely well initially, but after several years, I felt like I was no longer getting the same benefit. And that can happen. Hair loss doesn't necessarily follow a perfectly straight line. You can have excellent response, then stabilize, and then potentially start losing ground again. And we actually have a perfect example of that coming up, because one of these guys had an excellent response to finasteride, and then it wasn't enough anymore. Okay, this is the one. 5-year treatment, 2018 to 2025. He is 25, and his timeline is fascinating. His 2018 photo was taken when he was 18. He thinks he started losing his hair somewhere around 16 to 18. but didn't really recognize it until he was 20. Yeah, like me. And once he realized what was happening, he started finasteride. So already, this is someone who started very early. And look at the result. That's a really good head of hair. But now look at what happened over time. He says finasteride initially gave him gains during the first 2 years, but then in 2022, he started losing ground again. So he switched from finasteride to dutasteride. And by the time of the post, he had progressively increased his dutasteride dose to 1.5 milligrams daily. Woof. He had also used minoxidil on and off, starting with topical minoxidil, then switching to oral minoxidil in 2023. This is probably the most important post of this entire video, because this guy did something that a lot of people don't want to hear about. He's a really similar story to mine. He adapted his treatment. He didn't say finasteride isn't working anymore, so I'm going bald. He said, okay, I'm still progressing. What can I do differently? And he changed his regimen. In my case, I added minoxidil and microneedling to my treatment, which did wonders. I truly recommend that. Now, I'm not telling you to copy his doses. This is a Reddit user's personal routine, and particularly with medications like dutasteride and oral minoxidil, you should be discussing changes with a doctor. But the principle is interesting. Your treatment doesn't necessarily have to stay frozen forever. If you are continuing to lose ground, that's a different situation. And that's where medical reassessment becomes important. Okay, now we are getting serious, because we've gone from 1 year to 3 years to 4 years to 5 and now 8 years. And this is where the original question becomes really interesting. Can you still have great hair after being on treatment for almost a decade? This is the post. 8 years Finasteride Minoxidil with long-term results, 31 years old. He says the short hair photo was taken when he was 23 and the current result is after 8 years. And he basically says, my younger brother has been bald for years and I was sure I would be too. Thank God for medication. That's a pretty strong endorsement. And look at the photo, that's really impressive. I love his long hair. I think we are reaching the point where long-term results are possible, but mostly by combining the big three: minoxidil, finasteride and microneedling. With only one of them, it's very difficult to get to these results after so many years, because they tackle hair loss from different angles. So the chances of getting these results after so much time are much higher. And now we've reached the longest term result in the entire video, 10 years. And honestly, this might be my favorite one, because this isn't someone who started with mild hair loss. He says he started balding when he was around 15 or 16 years old, and describes his androgenetic alopecia as very aggressive. So he started with one simple treatment, 1 milligram of finasteride per day. He didn't want to commit to daily minoxidil and microneedling, so he initially just used finasteride, and by around 2 years, he was so happy with the result that he stopped taking progress pictures. And then, years later, he noticed that he was very slowly starting to thin again. He says this was around 9 years in. Because his hair loss was particularly aggressive, he decided to add minoxidil instead of committing to daily topical minoxidil and microneedling. Let's look at the timeline. 2013, starting point, 2014, finasteride, 15 finasteride, 2021, still finasteride, 2022, finasteride plus oral minoxidil. Yeah, I can actually see the difference between 2021 and 22. That's insane. This guy basically spent a decade fighting his genetics, and he won. But I think there's a much more nuanced lesson here. Because remember what I said at the beginning. I felt that finasteride became less effective for me after several years. This guy also experienced something somewhat similar. He says he began to notice very slow thinning again after around 9 years. But instead of abandoning treatment, he added another tool. And that seems to be a recurring theme in the longest term success stories. Sometimes the original treatment is enough. Sometimes you need additional stimulation. And sometimes you may simply reach a point where maintaining what you have is the realistic goal. That's pretty damn motivating. If you want me to do another Reddit breakdown, let me know what treatment or routine you want me to investigate next, because there are some crazy long-term transformations out there. And I personally would also love to see how some of these routines compare. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I wish you a happy hair journey.